Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. So lovely to see you all in the chat and lots of familiar names, which is always lovely as well. So, first of all, I really want to say a huge thank you to Steph for being the amazing person she is for every year doing our wonderful World Childless Week, where we can all learn and connect and be with others who understand us. So thank you, Steph, from all of us. Okay, so let me introduce myself first of all, and then bring in Steph and Kate to introduce themselves as well. And then I'll talk about what we're going to do as well this evening. Well, evening in UK time. I know we have people from everywhere. So I'm Bindi Shah, for those who don't know me. I'm a meditation guide and writer, and I do weekly classes, meditation classes for Childless Not by Choice, and Right to Heal workshops. So that's really what I do and who I am. And around my childlessness, so I'm just going to talk a little bit around the childlessness so that we can really come into that space as well for all of us. My childlessness is very layered and very varied. So there's been things through the years, basically. So in my 20s, I had a lot of non-committal relationships, which basically didn't go anywhere, which I know a few of you can really understand that in our community around that aspect of not finding a partner or having, these boyfriends who or girlfriends who don't maybe want to pursue that relationship. Um, I did also have an abusive relationship, which I didn't want to bring a child, or basically I couldn't bring a child into it. I married quite late and very naive. My goodness, almost 30, almost 40, and naively thought, oh, I've got all the time in the world, it will happen, all the time in the world, and it didn't. So lots of different varied reasonings around the childlessness and my adenomyosis, which a few of you know about, which then resulted in a hysterectomy. So this session then is called The Power of Pen to Paper. And it's all about how we can write and express ourselves and how that can lead to some ease, some healing, some movement forward, some understanding around all of the life circumstances that have brought you to here. And that's what we're going to do. So we're going to talk about that, talk about the writing, and see where it takes us. So I have Kate Millington and Steph Penny with me. I'll start with, let me start with Kate. So Kate is also known as Millie the Poet, and I think she will explain that as well. Around the naming, and she's a poet, a performer, and an activist. So I'm going to hand you over to Kate to introduce herself, and if you would like to say something around the childlessness, please do. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Kate.
Yeah, so hello everybody. So yeah, I'm Kate, also known as Millie the Poet. Millie was my nickname at school due to my surname, so that's where that one comes from. And also the poet because I write poetry, which is why I'm here this evening to talk to everybody. I'm based in Sheffield, in the north of England. And I'm a published poet nowadays. I say that out loud because it's just, I still can't quite believe it, to be honest. So it's a very exciting thing for me to say, although my family are sick of hearing about it. So yeah, my childlessness story, some similar touch points. Adenomyosis would be one of those. Having trying to get pregnant for a very long time, and that resulted in 2 unsuccessful rounds of IVF that were caused by having a very early menopause, essentially, that they were unsuccessful. So me and my husband looked into all of the possible options. You know, we all know them very well. Adoption and fostering and so on, and just decided in the end that we would be our own family. But as we all know, it's not an easy decision to come to terms with. So a lot of my poetry is kind of about that sort of grief cycle, I guess, from deciding that we couldn't continue to where I am today, where I'm able to stand up in front of rooms full of people and read poems about incredibly personal stuff. So yeah, that's a bit about me.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kate.
All right.
Steph. So usually in Australia, and I think she's going to talk a little bit about that. I love this little quote by you, so I'm going to read that out because I really liked it. She enjoys finding new ways of putting the joys and agonies of childlessness into words. Steph is a blogger, a songwriter, and the author of Surviving Singledom and Surviving Childlessness. Introduce yourself, Steph.
Thank you, Bindi. I've forgotten that I wrote that. That's rather good, isn't it? It's such a pleasure to be here, guys. Thank you so much for having me. And Steph Phillips, thanks for everything that you do and for inviting me to be part of this. It's so amazing to see so many people here in the webinar. I'm so excited. Although I don't think I've seen any Australians yet. Come on, guys. It's only 4 a.m. What are you doing? So I am an Aussie. I'm normally in Australia. Tonight I just happen to be in Austria, and that's caused some confusion online when people have said, is that just a typo? It says you're in Austria, but you're an Australian, aren't you? And I'm like, yes, I haven't moved countries. I just happen to be in Austria tonight. So yes, I'm a bit of a mad wordaholic. Always loved writing stories, journaling, that sort of thing. And then as a teenager started dabbling in songwriting as well. And I'll chat about why I love that so much a bit more later. But yeah, I love being able to put words and sometimes music to our emotions. So that's something that I love to do. I am childless by forced choice, which is a term I coined because I couldn't find any other terms that really fit my experience. I was hemmed in by a medical condition. So I've been diagnosed with lupus, which is an autoimmune condition, which can fire up at any time and pretty much attack any organ in the body that it likes without any reason whatsoever. Causes massive pregnancy complications. I also have endometriosis. You know, they're having a 2-for-1 sale at the diagnosis store. So hello to all my endo sisters out there. I know I'm not the only one. But yeah, with those powers combined, I just went, man, it's going to be far too dangerous to try and have children. So I made a difficult decision to remain childless, but I didn't really feel like it was much of a decision. I felt like the choice was pretty much taken out of my hands by medical conditions. So hence the term childless by forced choice. And I hope that that term will fit for others as well, who perhaps feel a bit kind of backed into a corner by circumstances, or maybe by illness like myself, or maybe by disability or other things that are going on, where you feel like, sure, in the end it was my choice, but it kind of wasn't much of a choice at all. So that's part of my story. And I do live in Australia at the moment with my husband and my fur baby, a rescue cat named Boba. And if you ever dare to follow me on social media, you will see lots of photos of Boba. I'm an unashamed cat photo poster. So there you go. That's me for now. That's enough.
Wonderful, wonderful. And yes, that term forced choice is very powerful as well, isn't it? That force, that kind of feeling of there was no choice, which is what childless not by choice is, but it's just that extra kind of dimension to it, which is, yeah, which just gives that real kind of oomph to it. Yeah, forced choice resonates. Yeah. So with the chat, if you do have anything to say, any questions, you can either use the Q&A or you can put your questions in the normal chat as well. So we will see them, or I will see them, and get to as many as possible within our time together. And also, if you're still introducing yourselves, please do. And if you see where it says to, if you do everyone, then you'll get to everyone with that, which everyone then can see where everyone else is from, which is really, really lovely. Okay, so let's talk then about the power of pen to paper. Who writes here? If you want to put in chat, if you do write, if you journal, so I'm going to talk a little bit about journaling. Maybe you write poetry, maybe you blog, whatever you do write it in. So it'd be really good to see that and to see who is doing a little bit. And so the cathartic power of writing, how we use words to move through, to express ourselves, and really to understand ourselves better. Wow, there's a lot of people writing in the chat, which is really, really good, really, really good. I feel that writing for me was the way to really express myself when I couldn't express to others. So when you can't talk to people, when you can't really have those conversations, but you can have those conversations with yourself through writing, and you can write everything you want. I'm very open when I write and when I journal. I know that no one's going to see that journal. And I will express myself and write whatever I need to get out. So for me, it's also a place to vent as well, to allow those deep hidden things out of me so that they can't come out. And they're in a safe space. They're in my journal. Those words are in a safe space, and I'm in a safe space while I do that. So I have found it extremely, extremely healing thing to do. Yeah, and I'll have more to say about that, but I'm going to again bring in Kate, first of all, about your thoughts then around writing and maybe the power of writing to start with, and how that's helped you, maybe through your childless grief, maybe through other circumstances.
Yeah, I think it's definitely been really, really cathartic for me to write poetry. I think one of the things about poetry is that you have, I guess, your two main areas within it for me, and you've got your kind of images and the ways that you can kind of connect really strongly with people with creating sort of visual or sound, or with whatever kind of image you want to create. And I think also there's your kind of structure as well of your poem. So for me, being able to write poetry, it can, I guess it's similar to journaling in that respect, because you've got your structure there. So it gives a kind of form and a sort of shape to those feelings of grief. I think that's the kind of the main ways I connected to what you just said there, Bindi. I think that kind of catharsis through, I mean, I'd rarely sit down and think, oh, I'm going to write a poem about this thing and just write it. You know, that's not really how, unfortunately, it's not really how the writing process works. But I think initially, you know, you get your ideas down, and then you can actually take those ideas and then put them into a very particular type of poem and a particular type of structure. And it's almost like giving yourself a hug, I guess, in that way. It's kind of wrapping something around yourself and thinking, well, how can I make this something that kind of communicates to other people, that communicates the feelings that I want it to, but mostly that kind of speaks to me, really, and kind of takes those sort of nebulous swirling things and kind of puts them down into something that is kind of tangible and physical, I guess.
They're definitely very similar, very, very similar within that, those words deep, coming out in some kind of form and then creating it into that poetry form. And that's actually very, very similar to what I do. So I do some poetry from my journaling. So, you know, very, very, similar process. It's about getting it all out, isn't it? Out of you and onto the paper.
And I mean, sometimes there are occasions where, you know, I would take other people's, I mean, Steph, I'm sure, is going to talk about songwriting, so I won't go there, but I would take a song, for example, and just borrow the rhythm and the rhyme of a song and use that to write a poem. Or I would take somebody else's poem and write a poem on the same theme as their poem, but about, you know, my experiences instead. So I think there's lots of different ways of kind of doing that. I think you can be, you know, you don't have to be hampered by getting started. You can just borrow somebody else's ideas, somebody else's structure, because everybody can do this. I mean, if I've got one message, and I'm sure both of you would echo it, you know, today, it's that everyone out there is a poet, everyone out there is a songwriter, everyone out there, well, I mean, everyone out there is, from what we've seen in the chat anyway, you know, but everyone can do this. You know, this is something, this catharsis, it's for everybody, you know, we can all access it. So yeah, I think the kind of the structure is something that certainly really helps me, just to take something that's kind of painful and change it into something that's actually, I don't want to say pinned to the page, but in some ways, you know, it's there now and it's down. And I think that's similar to writing, you know, like a journal. I mean, I've not journaled. I used to write diaries a lot, so I guess I don't know how they differ, to be honest, but it's a very similar thing. I think just sort of taking all those feelings and going,
taking it
here they
in.
are. Here they are, page, receive these things for me, you know. And turning the page, because sometimes with some poems will never see the light of day because they're not for other people, you know. I'm sure with both of you.
Totally. Yeah, that's very, very similar to the journaling process, where the journaling or the journal is really for you. So there is a question. So let me go to the question first, and then I'm going to bring in Steph to talk about the writing. So we have a question. Can you explain more about the form and structure of journaling? So I actually, when I journal, and I really think journaling is one of those things or processes which is very unique and individual to everyone. So the way I journal is I would go inwards. So I would either go into a meditation or a reflective part of myself, and then I would write or journal or express myself around everything that needs to come out. I wouldn't necessarily think of the form or structure of the sentences or grammar or even spelling or anything like that, I would allow it out. So it's more like a release. So it's kind of something which is in a way not structured. And then from that piece of writing, I would then take it onto something which could be structured. So for example, it could be a blog post, or even like a social media post. I sometimes kind of feel that can come from the journaling, like you let things out and then you might take a little bit of that and structure it into some kind of social media post or anything at all that you want, or the poetry. So kind of to answer the form and structure of journaling, I would say maybe there isn't one, and maybe it's more individual on however or whatever you need to do. And then with the poetry, I'm going to let Steph come in first of all, and then ask Kate if around, the form and structure of poetry, or again, if it's very similar to the journaling. But I do want to hear from Steph. So how are you using words and writing, Steph, to maybe understand your grief a little bit more, to express yourself?
Well, I think I can do no better than to pick up on a word that Kate used, which is nebulous. What a great word, man. I love it. I wrote it down on my little notepad here because I thought that's exactly it, isn't it? Like our thoughts and our feelings, and particularly when it comes to grief, which is complex and it's multi-layered and multifaceted. And sometimes it kind of has a mind of its own. We're not really in control, grief can sort of take over sometimes. So that nebulous quality, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Kate. And what I love about writing is that it gives me some kind of means for pinning down what my thoughts actually are, and what feelings are actually going on. Sometimes I think I know what I'm feeling, but in actual case, there's kind of layers underneath my feelings. So, I'm like, oh no, I'm snappy, I'm irritable. That's how I'm feeling. Oh no, actually, no, I'm sad, or I'm feeling lonely, or I'm feeling guilty about this choice again, or I'm questioning myself, or what have you. And I think being able to write that down helps to make it concrete for me. So it helps me understand myself, but it also then helps me to do that whole, the self-kindness stuff that's really popular at the moment, and which a lot of us are really bad at. Hello. So putting it in black and white there on paper, on that blank canvas, kind of gives me the ability to go, well, no wonder you're snappy. Like, look at everything that's going on inside you. Look at the day you've had. Look at the year you've had. This kind of makes sense here once you track it all. And so I think I agree with Bindi, what you were saying before about not really being any rules or set structure with writing. I think that it's a blank canvas, and that's the beauty of it, is that you can use it any way you like. You can make a shopping list if you want, or you can do a mind map, or you can write an essay. It's kind of up to you and what you're in the mood for. And in songs, there's a different kind of structure again. There are some, I don't know if I'd call them rules. Rules sound so, stuffy and and formal, don't they? But perhaps some trends or some principles that a lot of songwriters like to follow, but you can break those rules as well. So there's there's a lot of scope, I think, in writing, and that's good news. I think that each of us can make it our own, what we need it to be.
Yeah, definitely. And I actually think that then takes away the doubts around it, or the limits that we put on ourselves about, oh my goodness, I can't write, or who am I to write? Because we're thinking about those kind of more formal structures instead of actually doing the writing and thinking of it as a way of that self-expression, and also a way of understanding the grief, perhaps when you can't talk to other people about it. And then it's like, well, I want to understand why am I feeling this way? What's going on with me? And then using those words to express that. And then also those words come back to heal and to give that kind of comforting factor.
I think what's interesting, Bindi, is that, you know, we've talked a bit about journaling so far tonight. And there's such power in having that safe space, that haven to journal safely, when no one's going to judge us. What's interesting for me, having written a book and tons of blogs and all that kind of stuff, and surprisingly, I still have stuff to say, it seems. What's interesting for me is when my own kind of thoughts and reflections and my personal experience resonate with others. Like, that is wild. That is completely wild, when I'm like, I don't think this is just me, but I don't actually know until I put this out there. And so the sharing of writing is such a risk. It's a huge gamble, because you always hope it's going to speak to people and that you're not the only one going through this, but you don't actually know unless someone out there in the ether says, oh yeah, by the way, Steph, thanks for that. That meant something to me. So that's kind of, it's so beautiful when it means something to you, but also when it connects you to others. That's incredibly powerful.
Yes, yes. And is there a piece of writing that you would like to share, Steph, or a song or something which has resonated? Maybe share a couple of lines around it if you'd like to.
Well, yeah, I wrote a song, I think it was last year, about the daughter I never had, and that I wished I had. And it was called Angel at My Keyboard. And it was based on the whole fantasy. You know how we often have dreams about what we would have liked to have done with our children to be. So I would have liked to have taught my daughter the keyboard, because that's an instrument that I play. And it just kind of hit me one day in a flash. I could just see really vividly this image of my little girl sitting at my keyboard beside me, and the two of us playing together. Very emotional. Very emotional to write, to produce, to think about even. But that song has a lot of beauty in it, because I wanted to convey the joy and the wonder of being able to share something like that with my daughter, and the hopes that were there. And then the end of the song kind of softens a bit, and I just say, little angel at my keyboard, you were supposed to be here. Oh. And that's where it lands, is in that void, that sadness of, I wanted all this beauty and wonder for you, and I wanted it for me too. Of course I did. I wanted to be part of that. I wanted to give that to my girl. I wanted to share in it with her. In an ideal world, we know that sometimes what we want for our children doesn't materialize at all. She might not have been a musician. She could have been something completely different, you know. It's all in my head, but that's what came out in the song, was the joy and the hope of it, and then the I guess the reality kind of hitting home. And so that's sometimes the pain of writing. Sometimes it brings this stuff to the surface for us, especially if it's been submerged for a while. So it can be, I guess, I don't want to say challenging. It can mean that sometimes we've got to look after ourselves when we're writing. Sometimes we've got to pace ourselves and do little bits at a time, and take breaks when we realize that we're getting a bit overwhelmed, or it's getting a bit intense as well. But yeah, I was really that song was completely unique. I've never written anything like that before, but I got such a positive response from it when I released it last year, and including from other childless people in this community who were saying, you know, thank you, Steph, thanks for sharing that. And that means so much to me when that connects with other people. That's like, that makes it all worth it, you know. So
yeah, the connection as well of the writing. And let's maybe touch on this feeling of, okay, we're going into those depths, right? And those depths which are not comfortable, and perhaps going into, because I know definitely with my writing and my journaling and the poetry, there's a lot of dark there. There's a lot of dark things that come out. And you talked about self-kindness. I talk a lot about self-care as well, and what we can do to look after ourselves within that writing process, because things can come out and we can feel very confused. And I know a lot of writers at the start, when things do come out, there is that confusion, and also it can cause more grief and it can cause more things, because it's like, well, where do I take this? I've got all of these things coming out and it's out on the paper, but you haven't quite got to that healing stage yet where it is useful and helpful, but you're in that stage of, oh my goodness, I cannot believe all of these things have happened to me, and what am I going to do now with this? So I'm wondering if, Kate, what do you have to say around that, possibly with the poetry? And maybe there's been some poems which have really touched on your emotional parts of you, which you have then had to go back for the healing. I don't know. Is there anything like that, Kate, with you?
Yeah, there is. I mean, I have, I suppose, touching a bit on structure as well. I have a poem called For the Others on Mother's Day, which is about the sort of story of the IVF process that I went through, and it's set during the 2012 Olympics, which was when I had my 2-week wait period. So part of it talks about watching the amazing, I call them technical goddesses, running and jumping and swimming, those women. Oh, how they made their bodies fly when I couldn't keep a cell in mine. Sometimes I think I didn't try. And that is still really quite difficult to read. Touching on sort of structure, just going back to that for a second, because I don't want to answer that necessarily right now, but just to show you. So this is the poem. So if you can see at the bottom there is the section that I just read, when I couldn't keep a cell in mine. So deliberately isolated these sometimes I think I didn't try line just on its own, because it is a, you know, still really quite difficult one to perform. Sorry, it's gone very dark in here suddenly. I'm not quite sure what's happened. Oh, that's not helped. There we go. Yeah. So I think looking after myself, I suppose for me, with when I perform that particular poem, I feel like it's worth it. I feel like standing up there, because I do describe myself as an activist, and I feel like making myself vulnerable in that way to connect with other people, other women particularly, is worth. I suppose it's pushing myself a little bit. It's not too far, because I wouldn't do it if I couldn't do it. And I've performed that poem like 20 times or something now. But I'd be lying if I told you that it was easy to do. So I think the way that I look after myself is I do self-care. I make sure that after I perform it, I know I've got a quiet day. I know I'm kind to myself about how I perform it. And I don't sort of criticize it if my voice catches like it's doing at the moment. I just think, look, you've done that now, and you've got through it and stuff. So I think sometimes when we are writing these difficult pieces, I think things are gonna surface, and I think it's about, I think Bindi mentioned it earlier on, and I think Steph actually probably did too, but it's just about the self-care, isn't it? It's about listening to yourself and how much is too much, really. So yeah, I think that would be my answer.
Yeah, definitely. In a way, self-care is the writing, is the release, is the healing, but also it's something, self-care, that you need to do as you write as well. So, you know, to help you through all of that. Let's talk a little bit about the names, because I also write under a pen name. So I write my poetry under Grace Samaria. And I started doing this so that I could be quite anonymous, that I didn't have to say who I was, and I could write about difficult things. And no one needed to know it was me. And now I am more vocal about my pen name. But at the start, I wasn't. So I've written in Childless Week as well with the submissions. Sometimes when I'm like, oh, I want to just be in that kind of cocoon of not having to say that it's Bindi Shah, I will write under Grace Samaria. And I love the idea of pen names for our community. Because with childlessness and childless grief, one of the things that you can grieve from is not using the names that you had planned, the names that you had there, which you were going to name your children. And I feel that it's a nice way of expressing or bringing that aspect of expression in for yourself to use a pen name. So I don't know if anybody else uses a pen name, maybe in the chat. And I know with Kate's pen name, it's a little bit different, but in a way, I kind of feel there is that kind of thing of being Millie the poet is perhaps different to being Kate, maybe. So I don't know. Are you different when you're performing under Millie the poet? Do you use it as an armor or not really? Is it you? Have you encompassed her?
No, it is an armor, definitely. I mean, this is my, I'll just show you. This is my Millie the Poet top, so I tend to wear this when I'm doing poetry stuff. It's kind of like it kind of is like an armor, or a bit like a mermaid or some sort of crazy fish. I don't know. It's green. There's some orange going on. It's all about creativity, isn't it? But yeah, I mean, I am very open nowadays about my childlessness. You know, I do tell strangers. It's not something that is, you know, I think that there was a time where I was ashamed of it, very, you know, and I now obviously don't feel like that anymore. Having said that, you know, I wouldn't get up and kind of tell people the inner workings of my soul. So I think, and I mean, going back to the activism stuff, I have a poem called Have You Thought About Adoption? So, you know, this week for World Childless Week, we've got some days spent on some of the lovely phrases that people come out with when they want to ask you awkward questions. And so the Have You Thought About Adoption poem is basically, you know, yes, I really have, and stop asking me that. So there are some poems that are quite in your face. There is a poem called This Is Disenfranchised Grief, which I wrote with a group of women on Mother's Day, or Other's Day as we like to call it. I got contributions from about 8 different women to put that poem together, and that's very much about getting across how the grief actually feels. So I asked people to tell me, if they could, when it was at its worst, how does it feel? I mean, should I do a bit out of that? Would that be useful? I don't have to, if it's going to get in the way of the conversation.
You could do
quick
maybe do a couple of lines.
Do some lines. Okay. Yeah. So the end of it goes, It's the stinging, it's the stalling, it's those natural instincts calling, the paralysis, the falling. It's the bruises that don't fade, it's the choices you can't make, it's the tearing, blistering ache, it's the bones that won't heal, it's the feelings you can't feel, it's the toys that you can't buy, or the name or the clothes that make you cry, it's the names that you can't say, it's the future that lurks unmade. This is disenfranchised grief. That's the end of it. So I think yeah, it's a very sort of strong poem, and it is quite in your face. And I do perform that one quite regularly, sort of on behalf of those women and on behalf of the community. And I do like to use Jodie's research as well when I perform. So I think all of that stuff, you know, I'm quite a shy person. I'm not feisty, really. No, I'm not. But when I perform, I do. I have written poems deliberately to, because initially when I first started writing, my work was quite implicit. So I was writing about childlessness, but not telling people that that was what it was about. So I used a lot of imagery to disguise it, because for me, it was about talking directly to other women, but I didn't care if other people understood it. It wasn't for them. So that was how I started writing. And then
let's talk a bit about that, how everyone has started writing, and also how maybe if there's anyone in the audience or watching on recording who is not writing yet and would like to start, and where we would kind of have that starting point or that inspiration. One question I'm asked a lot is, how do you feel inspired? So if you can't write, or if you feel that you can't write, and where does the inspiration come from? So I started writing poetry actually quite young. I was 16, 17 when I started with my poems. And interestingly enough, I self-published under Grace Samaria, my book of poetry. And I did include poems from that time as well, because I thought they're part of my life journey. And I'm 50 now. So, you know, even though obviously I'm not 16, 17 anymore, those are part of my life's journey. So at that time, and I kind of feel this is a way, if you start young and you're in those teenage years and in the 20 years when you are ultra emotional and that kind of teenage angst and all of that coming up, sometimes it can be very easy to write because you want all of that out. And during the years, and during kind of when life comes and we have different things to organize with our life, the writing can kind of take a little bit of a back seat, and we might not necessarily be in careers of writing. So it takes a back seat, and it's not something that we're kind of thinking of. And then we get back into writing perhaps later on, or as a part of processing the grief or processing any kind of trauma that you've been through. And that inspiration then can come in from different ways. So I find that there's a lot of inspiration for me from nature and from what I see, the seasons changing, things going on in the world can definitely bring in a lot of inspiration. So one of my, I write a little bit around my childlessness, but really my poetry and my journaling as well, is from childhood things. So a lot of kind of childhood things. And one of the poems I wrote was actually after everything happened around Black Lives Matter and the whole racial discrimination. And then I would go back into my journals around when I was younger, facing similar racial discrimination, and thinking, oh, actually, I can write about that. I can bring this out now. Because it was external in the news, it kind of brought it out of me more. So that, I do look for that inspiration around a lot of what's going on in the world and nature. So I would definitely recommend that to anyone who's just starting out or needing that inspiration. Steph, how did you start writing? Like, were you young? How did it all start for you?
I was very teeny when I started. I think I've always written stories as a kid. I remember writing stories. As a teenager, it was adolescent angst that I was journaling, and then sort of came back to it as a young adult. Um, but I think what I'm reflecting on, Bindi, particularly as you were talking about nature, and drawing on your childhood memories, um, and Kate, you were talking about, you know, bringing your personality out in your writing as well. And I was thinking about how writing with words for me also intersects with music, and it intersects with prayer as well. So I think the three of those, like, often they kind of feed each other. And I know there's been times when um, I'm so full of words, right? But there's times when I can't write. Like, there's times when I do run out of words. Sometimes words reach saturation point. It's like you've rehashed this thing over and over. You know it inside out. You've done it to death. It still hurts. You got no idea what to do with that. So sometimes I'm like, I'm not interested in discussing this or writing about this any further right now. Maybe next week will be different. But that's what I love about music too, is that I can sit at my keyboard and play, and I don't have to put it to words. I don't have to explain it to anybody. I don't have to be articulate about it. I don't have to find a metaphor or make it clear, or I can just play. And that's another safe haven for me. And sometimes that's a form of prayer as well. And often, you know, people think of prayer as being words, but often silence is prayer as well. Being in nature can be a form of prayer. I really resonate with being in nature as well, Bindi. That's something that speaks to me too. So all of this kind of feeds this creative drive in us. And I find it's like a tap most of the time. It's like a tap. Once you turn that on, the water's just going to keep flowing. So the more I write, the more I find I have to say most of the time, in a weird way. I don't know if other creatives perhaps find that to be true, but I wrote myself a little note here. The other thing I would say about getting started with writing, something that I could not live without now, is my writing tribe. So found a group of similar-minded kind of writers. They're not all writing about the same things. They're not writing like the same topics as me. They're not even writing nonfiction. They're writing a whole bunch of other stuff. But they are so encouraging. And it's so great to have other writers to talk to about things like writer's block or procrastination, or, you know, I don't even know why I'm doing this. Is there any point to writing this stuff down? I don't know, maybe I should just give up. Those sorts of conversations, they've been life-saving for me. I don't think I would have ever published my book about childlessness if it hadn't been for that writing tribe, honestly.
Writers coming together and helping each other and inspiring, and yeah, being in that space. Totally. So so we have a question about that. How did you find your writing tribe?
I think it was after I published my first book, which was about singledom. I'm trying not to be a self-promoting jerk here, so just rein me in, Bindi. But I think it was honestly after I published my first book, and then a small group of Christian writers invited me to come to one of their meetings and present my process around writing a non-fiction self-help book about singledom, while also taking the mickey out of self-help a little bit and having a bit of fun with it. So I went along and just kind of, I didn't know anybody, but just sort of talked about this little debut book that I'd self-published. And anyway, they completely surprised me with their enthusiasm and their engagement with it. And they were very encouraging. And at the end of the meeting, people kind of prayed for each other, and just like there was such a lovely atmosphere of support. And I left and went, why haven't I been part of a writers group before now? I didn't even know this was a thing. I didn't know writers were meeting up like this and doing this. So it actually just kind of fell into my lap. It was pure accident. But now I can't see myself not being part of that group. Complete lifesaver. And especially those times when sometimes you can get a bit burned out with writing too. Like when you're writing all the time, I blog every week and I'm constantly working on the next book. Sometimes you reach a point where you're like, can I just switch off the writing brain for like a month and just not think about any books at all? Like, can we just stop with the ideas for a little bit? So to have a bunch of people who get what that's like is gold.
Yeah, yeah. And writing is, so for me, it's like it is a creative form, but there are also other creative forms. So you have your songwriting as well and your prayer. And I kind of feel that things like prayer and meditation and being in nature and walking, those are all included in a way in the writing process because they help the writing process along. So for me, most of my writing will come from the meditation. So that helps the writing. And there's a question, so that's why I've kind of brought that in. What time of day do each of you do your writing and why at that time? So I'm going to answer that with the meditation. So I meditate and then I write. So there's not necessarily a time of day. Sometimes it's morning meditation, sometimes afternoon, sometimes evening, but it's kind of like there with that. So that's for me, and I'm going to go to Kate. We don't have too long, but maybe when you started writing, Kate, if it's like maybe an age or something like that when you started, and also when do you write? What time of day, if there's a time of day?
Probably about 12. I used to write a lot of fantasy fiction as a child. Crazy world with people with big ears like mine. I tend to write in the evenings. I don't really know why. I just like it. There you are.
Oh, that's lovely. And also when you just said that evenings, I remember during when I was writing a lot about grief, I would wake up, like, you know, when you wake up really early and you can't get back to sleep. So 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning, I would actually just sit and write and then just let it all out. So instead of trying to go to bed or trying to go back to sleep, I would say, right, there's obviously something I need out, and then allow it out. So I think, yeah, probably the time that we write is so individual. Steph, what time do you write?
I have writing appointments, and then I have bonus writing time. Okay. So Fridays are my day off. I'm a morning person, so I write in the morning. Just works best.
Yeah.
But if I get bonus time, say on the weekend or of an evening, if I finish work and I'm actually like still semi-functional, and I've got an idea burning in my brain, I will sit down and write that out as well. So I think it's just got to be whatever works for you. Sometimes it's practical, isn't it? It's like, well, this hour from 5 a.m. to 6 a.m. is the only time I can have. So sometimes that's what it's got to be.
Yeah. Wonderful. Wonderful. So Steph's a little bit more structured, but also just as it flows, as it comes in. Yeah. Oh my goodness. That has flown by. I want to really end with something that you would like to say to everyone. So perhaps it is a line from your song or from a poem, or maybe it's a sentence of encouragement. I think I'm going to do a few sentences from one of the poems that I did in one of my Right to Heals, when I was looking at all of these women who are childless and fantastic. And I'm just going to do a couple of sentences. And when we come together, we are wonderful, and we are thoughtful, and we are kind, and we are compassionate and understanding. Kate, what would you like to say to everyone, and as a closing sentence?
That was amazing. I think just to echo what I said earlier on, really, that I think it's very easy to look at us three and think that we've got some kind of amazing superpower, and it's just nonsense. If you want to do this, you can do it. I'm a poet, so poetry is my thing. I've brought a recommendation for everybody. If you want to write a poem, I would recommend this. It's really, really good. If anybody's ever used it before, it is full of fantastic writing exercises. It's full of poems that you can basically just copy and try to come up with your own version. It's full of stuff. The question earlier on about structure, I'm not answering that right now because we're going to run out of time. But in there are, you know, odes, haikus, sonnets, you know.
Who's the author, Kate? Just read out the author
It's
for us.
Kate. She's called Kate Clancy, if you can see her name there.
Kate Clancy.
E-L-A.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And Steph, a closing sentence or something you want to say?
Inspirational quote. I really wanted to highlight, if you guys, you know, if you're watching this or listening and you're contemplating giving writing a go, or perhaps you're already writing and you're wanting to continue in that, I guess my encouragement would be to not be afraid to put your personality into your writing. So for me, you know, I've got a lot of, yes, serious stuff to say, but I'm also a bit weird and I'm a bit quirky, and sometimes I kind of see things a bit differently. So I've got a lot of humor and a lot of sarcasm and other other joyous things in my books as well and in my blogs. And I just wanted to encourage you guys to, you know, don't be afraid to be yourself and to put your personality into anything you want to write, whether it's shared or not. But if you do share, this community is amazing and they just embrace whatever you put out there. So
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you everyone so much. And also about the sharing, please, you know, Steph has this amazing World Childless Week where we can share our pieces and get the love from everyone, and do read all the submissions as well, or as many as you can get to. So thank you ever so much, everyone, for being here, everyone in the chat. Yeah, sorry I haven't managed to get to everything in the chat, but hopefully this was very useful and you enjoyed it. And thank you so much to Steph and Kate for being here. And all of our information is on the World Childless Week website. So thank you. Take care, everyone.